All right, everybody, I'm Logan Alec. In this video, I'm going to go over the May jobs report that the Department of Labor just released this morning. All right, I'm sure you've read the headlines already. What's the headline? The headline is that the economy added 2.5 million jobs in May. That's a record-breaking number. And that the unemployment rate declined by 1.4 percentage points from 14.7% in April to 13.3% in May. All right, so in this video, I'm gonna walk you through this report. I'm gonna tell you some things in the report that aren't necessarily reflected in the headlines, and then I'm gonna tell you my thoughts on what this report could possibly mean for an additional round of stimulus checks, okay? But as a preface, let's talk about what exactly this report is. Some of you may be wondering, what is the difference between this report and those weekly unemployment reports that come out on Thursday? I'll tell you. Those weekly unemployment reports that come out on Thursday are simply a count of the number of Americans who have filed for initial jobless claims for the preceding week, okay? They do not take into account Americans who have returned to work. So when you hear the statistics, over 40 million Americans have applied for jobless benefits since March, that just means that over 40 million Americans have applied for initial jobless benefits since March. Doesn't take into account that millions of those Americans could very well have gotten a job or gotten called back to work, okay? That's what this report does, okay? This report is a result of a survey taken by the Department of Labor last month in which they actually determined, okay, how big is the civilian labor force right now? How many people are outside of the labor force? And of those in the labor force, how many are working full-time, how many are working part-time, and how many are unemployed, okay? This is a much more robust report than simply counting the number of people who filed for initial jobless claims in a given week, all right? Now, what were people expecting out of this report? A lot of eggheads, a lot of smart people, a lot of economists, they thought that this report would be terrible. Okay, some of them thought that the economy would actually lose almost 9 million jobs in May. They were thinking that the unemployment rate could have hit 19.5, maybe even 20%. That's Depression era type stuff, right? Instead, the economy actually added a record-breaking number of jobs, and the unemployment rate decreased from April. Okay, this was a bit of a shocker for everybody. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, was obviously thrilled by these results. He tweeted this morning, "It's a stupendous number. It's joyous. Let's call it like it is. The market was right. It's stunning." He tweeted again, "It is a stunner by any stretch of the imagination." And if you saw his press conference this morning, he was of course lauding these numbers. So is Mnuchin, so is Larry Kudlow, so is Kevin Hassett. Larry Kudlow was saying, look, it's going to get even better in June if you look at kind of what's happening in small business. You know, we'll see what happens with that. But before I get into these numbers, let me read you the statement by the Secretary of Labor. Okay, the U.S. Secretary of Labor, his name is Eugene Scalia. If that name sounds familiar to you, it should, at least the last name, because Eugene Scalia is actually the son of the late Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the core members of the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, who passed away in February 2016, a little over 4 years ago. All right, this is Eugene Scalia, who is Trump's labor secretary, is one of Justice Scalia's 9 children, 5 sons and 4 daughters. All right, so here is what Secretary Scalia said about these numbers. Today's report shows much higher job creation and lower unemployment than expected, reflecting that the reopening of the economy in May was earlier and more robust than projected. Millions of Americans are still out of work, and the department remains focused on bringing Americans safely back to work and helping states deliver unemployment benefits to those who need them. However, it appears the worst of the coronavirus's impact on the nation's job markets is behind us. I have a feeling, and I'm going to talk about this more later in the video, that there's going to be some Republican senators who are going to point to this data and they're going to say, look at this Pelosi, look at this Schumer. Maybe we don't need to spend those big bucks that you wanted. All right, I'm going to get into that. But first, let's just go through this report. Let's walk through it. Total non-farm payroll employment rose by 2.5 million in May. Okay, that's basically jobs. And the unemployment rate declined to 13.3%. These improvements in the labor market reflected a limited resumption of economic activity that had been curtailed in March and April due to the COVID-19 pandemic and efforts to contain it. In May, employment rose sharply in leisure and hospitality, construction, education, and health services, and retail trade. By contrast, employment in government continued to decline sharply. I'm going to get into the winners and losers by industry later. I'm going to get into the demographic data, men, women, ethnicity, and all that. But first, let's just go over the high level. All right. So the unemployment rate, how is this 13.3% calculated? Okay. Well, you know, if there's a percentage, there's a numerator, the top number, and there's a denominator, the bottom number. All right. The top number here is the number of individuals unemployed. Okay. And I'm going to tell you a bit later who is in that unemployed number and some people who aren't in that unemployed number that you think should be in that number. We'll get into that. The bottom number is the total civilian labor force. Okay. So just to tell you how they come with this 13.3%. According to the Department of Labor surveys they took last month, about 21 million Americans are unemployed. Okay. And the total civilian labor force is about 158 million. You divide 21 million divided by 158 million, you get 13.3%. All right, those are the numbers behind the headline numbers. Now, we're not out of the woods yet. All right, this 13.3% rate is higher than the worst unemployment rate during the Great Recession. Okay, so you can look at this report two ways. You can say, oh, that's good news. It's better than we thought it was because we all thought it would be horrible, right? Or you could say, oh, this is actually bad news because, you know, we're actually higher than the worst we've been since the Great Depression. Okay, another concerning facet in this report that's not in the headline number. The number of unemployed persons are up by 15.2 million since February. Okay, think back to February. It feels so long ago, doesn't it? That was before really coronavirus really got going in the US. That was before the lockdowns and the great shutdown and all that. 15.2 million more people are unemployed now than were unemployed in February. That's a huge number. That's millions of Americans, millions of households, and that's not just 15.2 million, that's 15.2 million people plus their children who depend on them, other dependents who depend on them. That's a huge number. All right, so we're certainly not out of the woods, and I certainly don't want anyone, especially anyone in Washington, to pretend that we are. The number of unemployed persons who were on temporary layoff decreased by 2.7 million in May to 15.3 million, following a sharp increase of 16.2 million in April. Got it. Now, this is more concerning to me. Among those not on temporary layoff, the number of permanent job losers continued to rise, increasing by 295,000 in May to 2.3 million. Okay? These numbers, these positive numbers in the unemployment report are largely the result of those who temporarily lost their jobs. They were furloughed, right? Think of like a restaurant. Okay, a restaurant, you got to shut down, right? You can only do takeout now or whatever. Okay, now you can reopen. Now these workers can come back to work. Okay? These jobs numbers are being driven by that kind of situation. The number of permanent job losers actually increased in May. Okay? So while the overall picture is, oh, the unemployment went down, we actually had more permanent job losers in May. Okay? That's a bad sign. 2.3 million people, according to this report, are permanent job losers. That means they don't have a job to go back to. That's scary. What are Republicans going to do with them? Are they going to give them a reduced, version of the FPC, the 600, maybe something like 450 a week? We don't know. We're not sure. I hope they do, right? In May, the number of unemployed persons who were jobless less than 5 weeks decreased by 10.4 million to 3.9 million, all right? However, the number of long-term unemployed increased by 225,000 over the month and represented 5.6% of the unemployed. So what is this indicating to me? Okay, those unemployed less than 5 weeks dropped significantly. Okay, the long-term unemployed though, that went up. Would you rather be unemployed less than 5 weeks, or would you rather be long-term unemployed? I think you'd rather be this, right? So this is another sign that there are segments of the economy, there are individuals in this economy who, yeah, well, lots of people are being called back to work, those on temporary layoff. There are many long-term unemployed whose prospects are looking increasingly dim, and we shouldn't forget about those folks. Get this, in May, the number of persons who usually work full-time increased by 2.2 million to 116.5 million. The number who usually work part-time rose by 1.6 million to 20.7 million. All right, so people are coming back to work. Now, the number of persons employed part-time for economic reasons changed little in May, but is up 6.3 million since February. So 10.6 million people in this report, okay, are counted as employed. Think about this. How many people, well, let me just tell you what this means. So the labor report says these individuals who would have preferred full-time work were working part-time because their hours had been reduced or they were unable to find full-time jobs. This group includes persons who usually work full-time and persons who usually work part-time, okay? So 10.6 million Americans, according to this, are working part-time for economic reasons, meaning they're working fewer hours than they would prefer and possibly fewer hours than they worked before the pandemic. These folks are not considered unemployed. These folks are considered just as employed as full-time employees, okay? You got to remember this. Okay, these folks are not moving that 13.3% up, right? Because they're technically employed. Okay, so we look at that 13.3% unemployment figure. That doesn't tell the whole picture, right? That doesn't tell the picture of those who might only be working, 20 hours a week when they need to work 40 hours a week to pay their bills. Okay, so don't just take things at face value. And this is the real kicker here. The number of persons not in the labor force who currently want a job is 9 million. A reduction of 954,000 April or May, but 9 million is still a huge number. And don't miss this. These people, okay, these people are not included in either the numerator nor the denominator of that 13.3% unemployment figure. All right? These are folks who want a job, but they're not considered to be in the labor force because they haven't looked for a job in the past 4 weeks. And why haven't they looked for a job in the past 4 weeks? Possibly. Well, maybe because they're scared because there's a freaking virus going around. Now, what if we added these 9 million folks to both the numerator and the denominator? What percent would we come up with? I did the math. So remember I said the numerator for the 13.3% unemployment rate, that's the headline rate right now, is 21 million. What if we added these 9 million folks who are not being included even though they want a job? Well, that would take that numerator of 21 million plus 9 million to 30 million. Now the denominator, the total civilian labor force, 158 million. What if we add 9 million to that, those same 9 million people, you get 167 million, okay? What's 30 million divided by 167 million? That's actually 17.93%, okay? That doesn't sound quite as rosy, does it? And if we include those who are maybe employed part-time when they used to be employed full-time, or they used to work, maybe part-time before, but they had way more hours before, maybe can't pay their bills because they're working less hours, that number would probably be over 20%, okay? So please keep this stuff in mind. You really have to go through the details. I'm putting a link to this whole report in the description. All right. Now let's go over some industry-specific data as well as some demographic data. Okay. So in May, employment in leisure and hospitality increased by 1.2 million, following losses of 7.5 million in April and 743,000 in March. Right. So that's obviously a lot of this is restaurant workers. Okay. Obviously, those would be that's a very tough industry if with social distancing, right? You gotta shut down. Of course there's gonna be a rebound there. Construction employment increased by 464,000, education and health services by 424,000, retail trade by 368,000, manufacturing by 225,000. I'm not gonna go through all just the big ones. Professional and business services 127,000. So those are the winners, the winner industry. So what's the biggest loser industry? Government. In May, employment continued to decline in government. A decline of 585,000, following a drop of 963,000 in April. Employment industry fell by 38,000. Mining lost 20,000 jobs. And in May, average hourly earnings for all employees on private non-farm payrolls fell by 29 cents to 29.75%. $29.75. Why? Even though those numbers are looking good, why is the average hourly earnings, why did that decrease from April to May? Well, simple. A lot of the folks who lost their job in May and who got their job, a lot of folks who lost their job maybe in March or April and who got their job back in May were probably lower wage workers, right? A lot of restaurant workers, for example, Okay, well, many of those who, still had a job to hold on to in April were those, probably comfortably working from home and, making a decent living. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, now let's talk about some demographic data. Okay, so the unemployment rates for men aged 20 years and over decreased by 1.4 percentage points from 13% in April to 11.6% in May. For women, it was better. The unemployment rate went from 15.5% in April to 13.9% in May. That's a 1.6 percentage point reduction. Okay. For teenagers, it's even better. Probably a lot of those teenagers are working at restaurants, right? Fast food. The unemployment rate for teenagers 16 to 19 years old was 31.9% in April, down to 29.9% in May. So that's a 2 percentage point reduction. So of all these demographic groups they lay out, the teenagers actually had more of a rebound in May than any other group. Now let's talk about race and ethnicity. Of all the races, white people actually had a higher percentage points decrease in unemployment in May than any other group. So in April, the unemployment rate for whites was 14.2%. In May is 12.4%. So that's a 1.8% decrease. The group that fared second best was Hispanics or Latinos. The unemployment rate for that group was 18.9% in April, 17.6% in May. That is a reduction of 1.3 percentage points. Okay, I don't know where I would fall in because my dad's white, my mom is Mexican American, so I'm not sure where I would fall into that. But anyway, let's see, the group that fared now there's two ethnic groups in this data that actually had increasing unemployment rates. Okay, from April to May. Black or African American, the unemployment rate in April was 16.7%. In May, 16.8%. That's a 0.1 percentage point increase. Asians, they actually fared the worst. 14.5% unemployment in Asians for April, 15% in May. That's an increase of 0.5 percentage points. So as we can see, just whenever there's a recovery or something, or even the initial stages of recovery, it doesn't affect everyone equally. Okay, and I think we have to recognize that. There's other data in there, about education levels and all that. I'm not going to elaborate on it. If you want to look into the report, it's down in the description. All right. Now, what does this mean for stimulus? Okay, because I'm sure that's what we're all wondering, right? Well, look, we know that the Republicans have said we got to take a wait-and-see approach. We got to see how the economy is doing, how folks are doing, okay, after the economy starts to reopen. And, this data right here, this is a pretty strong argument for those Republicans who are a little bit more hawkish, right? I don't mean like hawk I mean hawk like a bird, right? When someone's a fiscal hawk, they're said to be, they're very concerned about the budget, they want to control spending and all that, right? So some of the real fiscal hawks might point to this data and say, we don't need to spend a lot of money on the people right now or businesses. But look, just this morning, if you saw my video earlier this morning, the president's talking about more stimulus. The president is talking about spending more money, okay? And Mitch McConnell did say that the Senate would be in lockstep with the president on the next relief bill, all right? So I do think this is probably the nail in the coffin, probably the 100th nail in the coffin for anything like a $2,000 a month for a year plan, like the Emergency Money for the People Act, or any of those other $2,000 a month plans. Okay, and I can't believe people are still making videos about those as though there's a shot in heck of them happening. Okay, however, I don't think this is a nail in the coffin for an additional round of stimulus checks and or additional payments to those who don't have a job to go back to, right, to the unemployed. This 13.3% rate, like, are we really celebrating 13.3%? Like, the worst unemployment during the Great Recession was 10%, all right? I mean, this is, it's good. It's not as bad as people thought it would be, and that's why the stock market is up. But it's not like, it's not like this is like some really awesome numbers, right? We have a long road ahead of us, okay? So, and plus, June's a different month, right? Protest this month, okay? That could change things up. Who knows, right? Who knows? This virus, we haven't figured out this virus, right? Who knows what's going to happen with this virus, especially in light of these protests? I don't know. I'm not a medical health expert. I hope that the country can continue to reopen safely and that the cases don't spike too much, right? But who knows? Anything can happen. So I guess my message to you is please don't give up hope. Don't look at this these good numbers and think, oh, there goes a chance of, you know, more stimulus or more unemployment and all that stuff. Okay, please don't give up hope. I really think that the message is getting to Washington that the people need more help. Okay, and I'm gonna be honest with you, a lot of you have caused me to have a change of heart on some of this stuff, right? A couple months ago when I started talking about this stimulus stuff, I was like, you know, I probably would have looked at something like this and be like, another stimulus? What are you talking about? We've already spent, you know, $3 trillion. What do we need to spend another trillion or so dollars for? But now reading your comments and just reading the things you write to me in the comments, I really do hope that Congress allocates, you know, at least another $300 billion to get another stimulus check out. I really do. I hope for that and I pray for that, okay? This isn't the be all end all, all right? I mean, it is very positive numbers. At least for many Americans, and it could cause some Republicans to say, hey, we got to put the pause button on stimulus. But, you know, sincerely, for many of you out there, I hope that's not the case from the bottom of my heart. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.